My guest for today in the Capital TV show is Ambassador Richard Schmierer. He's former United States Ambassador to Oman, and currently he's President Middle East Policy Council. Good evening, Mr. Ambassador.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm going to start by my question about the 100 days of Biden essential actions. In his first 100 days as president, reveal about his strategy for the rest of its term. What do you think about it?
Well, I think one thing he has made clear is that he inherited a number of domestic challenges, whether they were economic, whether it had to do with the pandemic, whether it had to do with tensions in various communities. And so I think he has really focused and had his team focus on all of these very concerning domestic challenges. Mm-hmm. So that's really been what he's worked on, but he has a very talented international foreign policy team. And so that team really has already begun changing the U.S. approach internationally. And we've seen that certainly nowhere more than in the Middle East.
Do you think that that his approach to Congress and government management point toward a return of normalcy to Washington, D.C.?
Well, of course, Joe Biden comes to the presidency after having been a long-time Washington insider. He was a senator for decades. He was the vice president for 8 years. So in that sense, he brings with him a body of knowledge and a body of experience, which allows that, what you've described as a sense of normalcy, the way White Houses, the way administrations have typically approached policy and have approached the other elements of government. So in that sense, it's a big change from the previous administration, which came in with no prior Washington or even government experience. And so in that sense, it's a return to what we're more normally used to.
What can Americans expect going forward?
Well, I think you're going to see President Biden try to stake out policies and approaches to issues which have broad public support. There are a number of areas, particularly domestically, where the people do see the need for action, whether that has to do with economic fairness, ensuring that all Americans have adequate access to economic possibilities, including health care, whether it's our infrastructure, which I think most Americans realize has been neglected over recent years, whether it's racial justice issues, whether it's democracy-related issues. These are all issues that I think a broad swath of Americans support certain kinds of reform, certain kinds of improvement. And I think President Biden will focus on those and will have strong support as he does so.
Talking about the negotiation with Iran, Tehran wants the Biden administration to revoke the terror designation of the IRGC and Office of Iran's Supreme Leader. Do you agree on this, or that can be happen?
Well, I think that would be one of the things that will certainly be discussed. There'll be negotiations about that. I myself happen to feel that putting terror designations on foreign government officials and foreign government institutions is not the appropriate approach to using terror designations. These are things that I think should be focused on organizations and individuals who are operating outside of government, who are undertaking terrorist-related activities, whether it's financing or violence. I don't think it helps when one government sanctions another government in this way. So I would hope that the negotiations ultimately would lead to the point where we are not sanctioning governmental institutions, which in this case is the first time we'd ever done so.
Ambassador Schmierer, let's talk about an event that happens yesterday, I think, in the UAE embassy, where they celebrate the Abraham Accords. The Israeli ambassador to USA, Gilad Erdan, and to the United States nation, he said now that the Abraham Accords have unlocked the tremendous potential for cooperation with our peoples, we can lead the way in developing the green tech that will power a green economy recovery for our countries, our region, and the entire world. How do you see the collaboration in all fields, and especially in climate change, between UAE and Israel?
Well, these are all very important issues, and I certainly am one who welcomed the negotiations and the new arrangements between the various Arab states and Israel. And so I think that is something that can be built on. Importantly, however, and I think the Biden administration will return to this, importantly, we still need to address the issue of the Palestinian conflict. And so I think while the Abraham Accords are a positive step and open up, as you've described, possibilities for cooperation in terms of green energy and other kinds of economic cooperation, which will help everybody in the region. It's also important that we continue to focus on the fact that the Palestinian conflict needs to be resolved. So I think that's the part that was missing in the previous efforts. I think that is something we will see come to the fore under the Biden administration.
Mr. Ambassador, there is a question for the audience asking you about, can you give some advice for Arab leaders how to deal with the administration, Biden administration?
Well, I think one of the things we're already seeing, and I certainly would encourage leaders in the region to really appreciate that America has strong interests and a strong affinity for the states of the region. We have obviously very close relations with our ally Israel, but we also have very good, strong historic relations with the Gulf states and with many other states in the Arab world. I think one thing that went wrong in the previous administration was this idea that the behavior of governments in the region did not affect our view towards those countries. And I think the Biden administration has made it clear that while we have strong relations and we want to continue strong relations, we do expect our partners in the region to abide by certain norms of behavior that would support the kinds of principles and the kinds of interests that the U.S. supports worldwide. I think that message has been delivered, and I would encourage them to keep that in mind.
On the other side, let's talk about the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen in its 6th year. There is a renewed effort to bring much needed pieces to the country and prevent a, of course, worsening humanitarian crisis. How do you think about Riyadh agreement concerning Yemen and how this crisis will end?
Well, I'm actually encouraged that I think we're seeing some steps towards progress. I think the Biden administration's decision to continue to support the Saudi-led coalition's efforts has indicated that we are going to be pushing very hard for a political solution. I think that message has been received in the region, including by the Houthis, and I think even including by the Iranians. Now, there have been some recent reports that maybe the Saudis and the Iranians are actually beginning to have discussions with one another. And that, I think, could be a venue, a forum for trying to resolve the issue. And I think the Iranians appreciate that as they want to get back with the U.S. in terms of the Iran nuclear deal, a resolution of the Yemen conflict would be something that would send a very positive signal in terms of the prospects for get a success on that effort. So I think there are a number of undertakings going on that point in a positive direction towards resolving the Yemen conflict.
How do you think the efforts of Linder King, the special envoy, American envoy to Yemen, and his declaration yesterday about that Houthis are not respecting the peace and there is some progress, but it's not enough?
Well, I have great confidence in Ambassador Linder King. I know Tim well. He was our charge in Riyadh, so he knows the region very well. He's been a long time a scholar and diplomat in the region. So yes, I think he's going to call things the way he sees them. So if the Houthis are really failing to act in ways that are helpful towards resolving this conflict, he is going to speak out and say so. But at the same time, I think he enjoys the respect of all the parties. And I think he's in a position to try to get the various potential supporters of a solution. Here I'm thinking of my former country, Oman, which might be able to play a positive role in resolving this. So I think he can bring together the parties that might be able to move this towards resolution. even as he will continue to be outspoken when he sees issues that need to be addressed.
And another issue, some of the audience, there is a tweet saying that Iran must be held accountable for the flagrant behavior. Its dangerous rhetoric and incident of violence must have consequences rather than being in negotiation with a terrorist country. So how do you think about it?
Well, I think I, along with many, many people, including many here in America, are very concerned with Iranian behavior in the region. And so, yes, I think every effort has to be made to get the Iranians to stand down from the kind of meddling and the kind of instability that they're exporting throughout the region. So I think that is an issue that we will engage Iran with. I think perhaps the Saudis are engaging Iran with that. I think others in the region. So I think we do need to continue to focus on malign Iranian behavior and take steps to try to counter it. But at the same time, I don't think we should hold the other issues of the region hostage to that issue. So I think we do need to resolve the issue of the Iran nuclear program. I think we need to resolve the issue of the crisis in Yemen. So there are things we need to still do, even as we seek ways to try to get Iran to stand down from its very unhelpful behavior throughout the region.
There is also a question about China. Is China now they're having a deal with Iran of $40 billion, I think, $400 billion investment over 25 years. Is that we can consider this as a strike against USA, or it's a threat, or what?
Well, in general, I think what we're seeing is China try to increase its leverage, its influence throughout the region, not just in the Middle East, but in Africa and elsewhere. And so I'm not surprised that China is making such an effort also with Iran. And China traditionally has been a major purchaser of Iranian oil, so it has already had strong economic ties with Iran. So I don't see that as being particularly different from China's efforts with other countries in the region. But at the same time, I don't have a great concern that there's going to be interest on the part of the countries and peoples of the region in becoming close to China or in emulating China. So I think there will be economic relationships, but I don't see those as becoming strategic or as becoming relationships that are similar to the kinds of relationships that the peoples and countries there have with the US and with the West in general.
My last question is considering the climate change. Do you think that this can be a new war between China and USA?
Actually, I think that China will be willing, if the global community takes steps towards addressing climate change. I think China would be willing to participate in that. Remember, China itself has suffered greatly from air pollution and is making an effort to try to move away from what it now primarily relies on for energy, which is coal. And so I think China would see an upside, would see advantages in trying to participate in a global effort to improve energy in terms of renewable energy. I think they would see, as we see, that there are many economic opportunities in a revolution of our energy sources. And so I think they could be convinced to participate in a broader global effort to really try to address the climate change issue.
There is new initiative that are part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman Vision 2030 plan to diversify the kingdom's oil reliant economy. So how do you think the interest in being involved in Saudi Arabia in this part?
Well, I think that's a very great, it's an important initiative. I think it's something that Saudi Arabia has been seeking to do for some time. So I think there are probably going to be at least two parts to that effort. One will be to monetize their oil resources so that instead of relying on the export of oil, they can rely on the financial benefits, the savings, so to speak, that they will have gained from their oil. The other, though, I think Saudi Arabia would actually be in a good position to be a leader in renewable energy, particularly in solar energy, because it has funds to invest in that field, and it itself would be a good location for being able to generate solar energy. So I think that transition could be one that really does help Saudi Arabia not only get away from reliance on the direct export of petroleum and gas, but to be a leader in international efforts to try to develop renewable energy sources.
Okay, Ambassador, I have my last question. According to Bloomberg, the UAE, which is the third largest producer in OPEC, increased its holdings of US bonds by nearly 50% to 50.6 billion at the end of February, an increase of nearly $17 billion that made it the second largest buyer of securities that month after the United Kingdom in USA. So what does that mean? What is that plan?
Well, I think we're at an interesting point internationally in terms of economics. I do think that most experienced observers think that the US economy is going to recover more quickly than other economies. We've been fortunate in terms of our vaccine rollout, and I think we're poised to have some significant economic growth. Therefore, I do expect to see foreigners and foreign governments investing in the United States. And so I assume that's what the UAE had in mind. They see a very positive picture of US economic growth going forward, and they feel this is a good time to invest in that.
The UAE overtook China in its purchase of US Treasury bonds last February, lagging behind other major oil exporters in the Arab Gulf region, which reduced their holdings of one of the safest assets in the world. This is a plan related to, of course, investing in USA. What do you think about it?
Well, yes. I mean, I think you mentioned last February. Of course, that was just before the pandemic hit, and so I'm not sure what they were thinking in terms of predictions at that time. But certainly since that time, and in recent months, the way things have played out with the pandemic, I think supports the idea that the U.S. is a good location for investment at the present time. I think we'll see that at least for the next year or 18 months, because I think other countries will be slower to recover from the current situation with the pandemic. So we'll probably see the U.S. as a prime place for foreigners to invest, at least over that time frame.
Thank you a lot, Mr. Ambassador Richard Schmierer, for being with us in the Capital TV show. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.